If you ask who holds the record for surviving the longest lost at sea, you'll usually hear the name José Salvador Alvarenga, who drifted for 438 days. But 2 centuries earlier, his record was quietly beaten by a man who shouldn't have been on the ocean at all. In fact, his own government legally forbade him from leaving the country. In the early 1800s, Japan was operating under a strict policy of isolation. To keep outside influence away from the population, the military government had effectively sealed its borders. Foreign ships were turned away, and Japanese citizens were barred from traveling abroad under the threat of permanent exile. This created a massive logistical problem. Japan's landscape is heavily fractured by mountains, forests, and steep slopes, making large-scale overland freight nearly impossible. To feed the capital city of Edo and move domestic cargo across the islands, the government had to rely entirely on the sea. To navigate this closed-loop economy, Japanese shipbuilders engineered a very specific type of vessel. It was highly efficient at moving cargo along known coastal routes, and by design, completely incapable of crossing an ocean. This is a cross-section of a capsizing. Compared to the deep-keel European galleons of the time, these Japanese cargo ships were built with relatively shallow, broad, and flat-bottomed hulls. This shape allowed them to hug the shoreline and navigate shallow harbors to load goods. But that shallow hull removed the stabilizing anchor of a deep keel. In the open ocean, it would be highly vulnerable to rolling uncontrollably on heavy swells. To keep the ship straight, the crew relied almost entirely on a massive, singular rear rudder. In October of 1813, a capsizing named the Tokujo Maru was sailing south from Edo under the command of Captain Jûkichi. As they passed through an exposed stretch of deep water known as the Bay of Bad Water, a violent autumn typhoon swept over them. Towering waves lifted and slammed the ship repeatedly until the giant steering rudder finally snapped off. The crew instantly lost all directional control. With violent winds tearing at their tall mast, the flat hull was at severe risk of flipping over entirely. To save the ship, the crew made the desperate choice to chop down the mast. Cutting the mast lowered their center of gravity and kept them upright through the storm, but it also left them with no steering and zero propulsion. In a matter of hours, their functional cargo ship was reduced to a helpless wooden raft. The disabled ship was now sitting directly in the path of the Kuroshio Current. Known as the Black Current for its deep, dark waters, this is a massive western boundary current that acts as an oceanic river flowing swiftly past Japan and out into the open Pacific. The water here moves fast, up to 8 feet per second in some stretches. Without a rudder to fight it, this conveyor belt immediately grabbed hold of the Tokujo Maru and pulled it violently away from the Japanese coastline. In the first few days, the experienced sailors assumed they were still in traveled waters and expected a rescue. But as days turned into weeks, the familiar mountains faded from the horizon, and the empty ocean swallowed their entire field of view. The geographical borders of Edo-era Japan no longer applied to them. The crew was caught in a relentless drift toward the largest and deepest body of water on Earth. Starvation, surprisingly, was not their immediate problem. The crew survived by collecting rainwater, fishing, and rationing their heavy tribute cargo. Below deck sat several hundred bags of soybeans, providing a dense, consistent source of calories. But those soybeans contained a fatal flaw. While they provided enough energy to keep the men alive, a single serving carries almost zero vitamin C. Depriving the human body of this specific micronutrient for months on end starts a deadly biological clock. Without vitamin C, collagen production grinds to a halt. Scurvy begins to physically tear the body apart from the inside. Muscles weaken, skin loses its strength, blood vessels become frail, leading to severe bruising and internal bleeding as the immune system systematically deteriorates. Over the next year, crew members who used to haul heavy cargo could barely stand. One by one, they succumbed to the disease. The surviving men carried the bodies down into the cargo hold, where the cool, dry air naturally preserved the corpses. By late June of 1814, the crew had been decimated. Only Captain Jûkichi and 2 sailors, Otokichi and Hanbei, remained alive. Emaciated and suffering from advanced scurvy themselves, they had no power to change their situation. They were waiting to die. They possessed enough calories to hold off true starvation, but the complete absence of a single microscopic nutrient systematically dismantled almost every man on board. On March 24, 1815, roughly 484 days after the typhoon hit, sails finally broke the horizon. An American fur trading vessel named the Forester spotted the battered Japanese ship drifting 300 miles off the coast of California. The American sailing master boarded the Tokujo Maru and found an unsettling scene. He discovered the 3 severely weakened survivors barely clinging to life, sitting directly above a cargo hold containing 14 remarkably well-preserved bodies. The Forester brought the survivors ashore in Alta, California. When Captain Jûkichi touched solid ground, he cemented an incredible piece of history, becoming the first known Japanese citizen to ever set foot on California soil. The culture shock was immense. Coming from an isolated nation where Buddhist beliefs heavily discouraged meat consumption, Jûkichi watched Spanish colonial horsemen slaughter cattle right in front of him. But he ate the rich meat they offered, and those nutrients finally began to reverse the damage scurvy had inflicted on his body. Getting the survivors home required a complex, multi-year logistical relay. The men were transported north to Bodega Bay and eventually to Sitka, the rugged capital of Russian America, where arrangements were made to put them on a westbound Russian vessel. But the biological toll of their 17 months adrift was too deep. The return passage took so long that the sailor Hanbei finally succumbed to the lingering effects of scurvy before he could see his home. Jûkichi finally arrived in Japan after roughly 2.5 years at sea. His country had long assumed he was dead. Though he was granted honors for his survival, he spent the rest of his life in near isolation, trying and failing to build a memorial for the crew members who never made it back. A storm pushed Captain Jûkichi past the borders of a completely closed society, resulting in a 484-day record for survival at sea that remains unbroken. But the true cost of that record was entirely his to bear, leaving him to carry the memory of his lost crew alone until his death.